Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the newest album from Earl Sweatshirt, Some Rap Songs. This is the newest album from Earl that recently dropped, and this is a pretty interesting album to say the least. Regardless of, the actual quality of the music on this album, just taking a look at the track listing and taking a look at the overall runtime of the album and a lot of what goes into this album on a very surface level, you could probably guess that this isn't going to be a typical album, given that this thing is pretty short at around 24 minutes in length total, and all the songs on this thing run pretty short as well. There's not a track on here that exceeds 3 minutes in length. They're all relatively short tracks. And we've got a good few hip-hop albums this year that tend to be around this length. Pretty short, pretty to the point, almost EP-like in length. However, I think out of all the ones released this year, this album might be the best of the short hip-hop albums that we've received. Now, of course, to some extent, it's like comparing apples to oranges, given the different styles that some of these different albums have going for them. Just because they're pretty short doesn't mean they're necessarily similar, and this album in particular tends to be pretty different from a lot of the other short hip-hop albums we got this year, because whereas a lot of those had songs on them that were pretty typical songs, just on a shorter project overall, this one is one where you have a normal album's worth of tracks, but they're all made to be really short and to the point, and it just ends up adding up to a really short runtime overall. And despite the fact that all the tracks on this album are pretty short, like I said, they are very much to the point, and they're not lacking in content by any means. While this is a really breezy listen, it's not necessarily a very easy listen for a multitude of reasons. There's a lot of content packed into the 24 minutes or so of this album, and when you actually start digging into that content, particularly the lyrics, it's pretty dark overall. Throughout this album, Earl's talking about some really dark subject matter, including things like depression, addiction, paranoia, suicidal thoughts, his relationship with his parents. There's a whole lot of dark stuff here on this album, and the way the album is structured with all these short songs, it really just feels like Earl is bombarding the listener with all these short ideas, each containing their own dark subject matter, and that can be a bit disorienting on some of your first listens. In fact, that was the case for me, and after giving this thing some initial listens, I knew this was an album I was going to have to spend a good amount of time with to really let it sink in, I guess you could say, and that's why I'm only getting to reviewing it about a week after it came out. But with every listen I gave this thing, it did grow on me a lot more until I've reached a point now where I really like this album, or if you can already tell. I think it's a really solid project, and this very disorienting feel that the album has going for it is part of the reason why. And I really like how he was able to incorporate a lot of the very dark subject matter into this thing. And if you really pay attention to the lyrics here on this album, if you go through, read the lyrics, there's a lot going on there. And even though these songs are very short, there's a lot to unpack in even some of the shortest tracks here on this album. I highly recommend, this is definitely an album that you may want to read the lyrics along to while you're listening to it, because I think that's a pretty good way to get a better feel for the lyrics as you're listening. As for Earl's rapping itself on this thing, he's doing a fantastic job, as he typically does. I love his flows throughout this project. He just sounds both like he's in a very dark place, which is, I guess, to be expected given the subject matter here of this album, but he's also delivering with a lot of technical skill, but it doesn't come across in a way where he's just trying to really show off his technical skill. It all just comes out so naturally, and it just feels so smooth at times as well. It just works really nicely. He's a fantastic rapper, and he definitely showcases it here on this project. The production is another aspect of this album that may make or break this album for people, considering that Earl decided to throw us a bit of a curveball on this one with some more lo-fi, scatterbrain sounding production. I can understand why some people may not care for it, but I thought it was pretty good at matching the rest of the atmosphere of the album. Like I said, this project is a pretty personal one, with Earl talking about a lot of the just dark stuff going on in his life, and the beats really match that, not just because he produced a lot of the beats here on this project, but because I feel like they add very nicely into that very personal feel. They feel almost not necessarily thrown together by an amateur or something like that, but they feel like they were made specifically for the songs here on this project, just like as a passion project more than just some high quality beat or something like that. And the samples used in a lot of the beats here are also pretty interesting as well. I've heard a lot of people compare this album to Mad Villainy, and I could definitely see some of the parallels with the kind of sample-based production, the very short song lengths, the fact that Earl is clearly inspired by Doom in his flow. But both albums are worlds apart when it comes to the atmosphere and overall feel of the projects. One is a supervillain comic book inspired album that isn't super serious for the most part, and the other is one of the most dark and depressing albums I've heard this year. Regardless, I think both of those albums are fantastic, and the production on this album is really great as well. I think it just matches so perfectly with the feel of the lyrics and Earl's delivery here. It just adds to that personal feel that I really enjoy getting from this project. There are maybe some aspects to it that I'm not super hot on, in particular when it comes to some of the mixing of the vocals here. I just feel like at times it's difficult to make out what Earl is saying at times just because the beat is a bit louder than it should be, I feel. And I guess that does play into the lo-fi aesthetic of the album that he was clearly going for. But given how much I feel the lyrics are, important to this album, and the fact that I feel like they're what's really tying everything together, I feel like it would have been a good idea to have those on display and as easy to hear as possible in the mix. Just because I feel like that really they are really what ties this album together, given the fact that the production and the song lengths are so scatterbrained and all over the place. As for other complaints I'd have with the album, I'd also say that the album doesn't exactly have a fantastic pacing, I feel, in terms of how the tracks move from one another. Not necessarily the transitions between the tracks, because I think a lot of those are really well done overall, but more so like when you get to the actual meat of the track itself, I feel like, disregarding some of the transitions between the songs themselves, you could reorganize much of this album into a different order, and it really wouldn't change the listening experience all that much. With the exception really of some of the tracks that appear towards the end of this thing, like the instrumental outro, which I feel like is a pretty nice closing to the album overall. It's just a nice little breather at the end of this thing. I feel like that definitely works best as the closing track, but aside from that one really, and maybe the one track that has his mother and father speaking on it, that one probably wouldn't make sense earlier on in the album, and I do like how it appears towards the end to really tie together some of the ideas concerning him and his parents and their relationship. I feel like that one works better towards the end of the album, but much of the rest of the album I feel like you could really organize in a different order if you wanted to, and it really wouldn't change things up all too much. This isn't really a fatal flaw with the album or anything quite like that. It's really not that much of a big deal at all. But, I would have liked for maybe a bit more of a flow in the project from start to finish. But yeah, that's not a really big problem, and at least when it comes to me. Some rap songs overall just feels like a normal length album compacted into a really short project. Don't let the fact that this thing is only like 24 minutes make you think that there's not a lot going on here on this project. It's like a normal album's worth of material compacted into a really short runtime. It's just like Earl decides to skip out on all the hooks and other poppy elements that you typically find on an album and go straight for the verses, go straight for the hard-hitting lyrics, go straight for the really odd beats, and make a really great album that just doesn't last all that long. Because believe me, there's enough material here on this album, there's enough to really dissect and look over to last you a good few listens overall. And despite some of my very minor complaints with this album, I think it's a pretty great album overall, and definitely one that's going to stay in rotation for me for a good bit more, I would say. I really enjoyed some of the experimentation on this thing. I liked the more personal feel overall. I guess it's not the first time Earl's ever tried to go for that, but I feel like this is probably the album where he pulls it off the best. I feel almost like I've seen aspects of his personal life that just weren't made to be seen with how personal he gets here on this project when it comes to some of the dark subject matter. I think the production here pairs up with this very nicely. It's just a very solid project overall. And while I don't necessarily think this is a project for everyone, I think a lot of people will enjoy this project overall. So if you're a hip-hop fan, if you're an Earl fan, this is definitely worth checking out. If you've never really been an Earl fan or anything like that, if you don't really care for this style of music, maybe it won't really do much for you, but yeah, this is definitely an interesting project to say the least. I think most people could agree on that. Yeah, and with that said, that is just my own personal opinion on this project. Feel free to have your own. In fact, feel free to leave it in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. Things like album reviews, track reviews, countdown lists, all that good music-related stuff. So if you want to see more of that, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching, and stay golden.